Yes, and I say this with a lot of disappointment in my heart. Welcome to On Deadline, the Washington Examiner's political game show. I'm Tiana Desher.
And I'm Christian Daytalk.
Each week we discuss the latest breaking and biggest news. We give our opinions on that news, and you guys in the comment section vote with whom you agree. Don't forget to leave those comments, like this video, subscribe, and share it with your friends. We begin this week with the absolute biggest story, Christian, above the fold. Now, after at least 41 days and counting, Democrats are finally agreeing to end the longest federal government shutdown in the nation's history. What is the actual state of play here? What does reopening the government really mean right now?
Well, there's still several steps we have to get through, Tiana, but on Sunday there was a big breakthrough over on the Senate where a group of Democrats and independent, Angus King, shout out, and some Republicans brokered sort of a truce in this ongoing detente that we had that will see potentially the government reopen later this week. This deal is important because we remember those expiring ACA tax credits, those were at the heart of this fight. And while Democrats did not secure a full extension in the CR as the progressives wanted, they did get a commitment from Senate Majority Leader John Thune to vote on a standalone bill extending those tax credits by the second week of December. There were a couple of other concessions from Republicans. One, guaranteed back pay for all of the furloughed federal workers. And two, the White House will recall all of the RIF'd employees. Those are the reductions in force that Donald Trump put into place around week 2 of the shutdown back in October. And, again, there was a positive vote. 8 Democrats sided with the Republicans to advance this bill on Sunday, but it's only one procedural step. The Senate needs to keep tinkering. There are opportunities for Democrats opposed to this agreement to throw some procedural hurdles in the way. And of course, the House must again vote on the updated CR later this week. Now, Mike Johnson told us once the Senate has final passage of the bill, he will give a 36-hour notice for the House to vote. Hopefully, we will see the government reopened by the end of this week or the beginning of next week. But it's sort of telling because, in my mind at least, this seems like a big win for Democrats. But a lot of people are talking about how this is, sort of the party backsliding, the Democrats caving, because of the big cover that they got with last week's election. Do you see the dynamic playing out that way, or do you think there's something else going on behind the scenes here?
I mean, it's important to point out that the election absolutely did help, or the shutdown did help the election results for Democrats because you had in Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, we'll talk more about her 15-point sweep or whatnot, relative to Kamala Harris's 6-point win in Virginia. And a large part of that was that a lot of federal workers live in Northern Virginia. It's important to know that, it's about 3 million workers as of Monday who are not getting paid, 2 million of whom are still being forced to work. The way that it's really affected most ordinary Americans who aren't in federal employment are the airlines. Yeah. On Sunday, before Veterans Day, you had 11% of major commercial airline flights were canceled outright and 40% delayed. So that's the majority of commercial airline flights majorly influenced in some capacity because these air traffic controllers, if you're not getting paid as an air traffic controller and you're doing DoorDash the night before, it's not exactly safe for you to come to work. It's not safe for other people for you to come to work. Now, Democrats got what they wanted, which made it a little bit easier in terms of winning the election, because I don't think anyone seriously thinks that they were caring a lot about the extended, enhanced ACA subsidies that Joe Biden and the rest of the Democratic Party specifically voted to expire in 2022, right? That was always the original intention.
Well, they extended them in 2022 to expire this year.
To then expire this year,
right,
because they're supposed to be an emergency COVID era, just an extra safety net. They were never meant to be permanent. And what they wanted this time around was to use that as a bargaining chip. Clearly, from my vantage point, all of the concessions made to Democrats are all things that Republicans did during the shutdown. the reverses in the RIFT employees, in the in the terminated federal employees, it doesn't apply to any of the Doged employees, right? It's literally just who was, sure, Republicans used some federal employees that they RIFT as leverage. Democrats used 3 million federal workers who didn't get paid as leverage. One seems a little more cynical than the other. So yes, they got that reversed. On a good front for Republicans, though, so you have this CR that will fund the government through January, but you'll have 3 separate appropriations bills that will take a lot of the politically toxic, ticking time bombs off the table. Agriculture Department, which includes SNAP, VA, Pentagon, FDA, congressional operations, all will be funded through the 2026 fiscal year, taking them off the table for the midterms. So even if we were to get another government shutdown in January, it would not be this devastating where you have members of the military not being paid, which is just unconscionable, especially as we head into Veterans Day. So Democrats, they did not get anything. Chuck Schumer thought that he was going to save himself from AOC primarying him in the Senate, not realizing that she will run for president, and as evidenced by Feuntes and Mamdani winning a majority, which we will talk about, she will be compelling, especially in the Democratic primary, presidential primary. And, they didn't actually stand up to Trump. You know who stood up to Trump really ending the shutdown? The Republicans. Trump was on Truth Social for over a week begging Republicans to blow up the filibuster. And that is the line in the sand. They said, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to bend to Obamacare. We're not giving Obamacare another cent. We're not blowing up the filibuster. You have this CR at Biden-era spending levels, take it or leave it. And they won. And it's if I genuinely thought Democrats thought they were going to get an Obamacare victory, which again, embarrassing of all the things to try and attack Republicans on, of which they are many, in terms of abuses of executive authority, defying procedural or legal norms. The extended ACA enhanced subsidies expiring was done completely within bounds of this was already the existing law. The ACA modifications made in Big Beautiful Bill, which was just done normal reconciliation process, nothing that different. I don't see where the victory is. And, again, 40 days of millions of federal workers who did not get paid, who maybe they took out credit card debt. How did they make rent? What are the credit scores look like?
Well, Tiana, I agree with, I'll say, 88% of what you just said. On the filibuster, it was surprising to an extent to see Republicans actually stand up to Donald Trump and not just let him do whatever he wanted to do. I agree that when it comes to using up political capital in this shutdown debate for a potential another fight that we might be having coming up in 2 months or so in January, I'm talking about, again, RIF employees, and of course, funding USDA and other programs so that SNAP and WIC and military pay don't get interrupted in a potential another shutdown. That's all true. Here's where the win is, okay? I think everyone at this point in time, I was about to say even progressives, but especially progressives, would admit that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is an incredibly flawed solution to an incredibly important problem, right? And so I don't disagree with you when you say, why would Republicans just extend a system which isn't really helping, that we have to put in massive tax credits just so that people can still afford to buy their insurance? No arguments from me on that. But this is where Democrats get a win in ending the shutdown right now. The rhetoric coming out of the Republican camp throughout this debate has been, yes, we agree, healthcare is important. We want people to be able to afford their insurance, but there's still time to negotiate this before the end of the year when those new increased premiums go into effect starting January 1. It's a hypothetical debate. He said, she said. Which side is right? We do it right now? We do it 2 weeks from now? That's not really a pressing issue for people. But now, John Thune, Senate Majority Leader, has committed to holding a vote on a standalone bill. So Republicans are going to have an opportunity to either say, yes, we agree that you shouldn't have to pay $4,000 a month for insurance, or no, we don't agree with that, and you're probably going to lose your insurance because you can't afford it, and there is going to be hell to pay in the midterms. Let's not forget the fact that, again, Mike Johnson has not said he will commit to bringing this bill to the floor. The House Speaker has the purview to kill legislation in any way should he decide to go down that route. So I do think the idea, again, I'm sorry, progressives, but let's be honest. You can't just throw a tantrum and demand that the entire system be changed. And then, I am Genie, the problem is magically fixed, and the Republicans who were viciously opposed and tried for the better part of the last 12 years to throw out this system in the first place are going to save it. That's crazy. So take the small, measured win, put the onus back on Republicans, and again, we saw what happened when the debate was centered around affordability and the shutdown itself last Tuesday. Think about how bad things could be for Republicans next November, which will then put you back into potentially majorities in both chambers. I think the victory is clear in my eyes. It might not be as wide and systemically changing as you might have hoped for, but again, this is Washington. Just ask Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I'm only bringing her up because you brought her up earlier. She was a true progressive coming in when she was first elected in 2018, right? She was beaten down by this system, by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and she, I would argue, is emerging as a Pelosi-like operator herself.
Yeah, she's a very wily political operator.
She maintains her progressive bona fides, and she is able to operate in not only a strictly partisan system here in D.C., but a highly fractured Democratic caucus and sort of act as a bridge. So there are lessons to be learned on both sides, not just for Republicans, Democrats too. And I do think for that reason, this is a major victory for the folks on the left. That being said, we've exhausted this issue. I think we've talked about it for like 6 weeks in a row. So let's move on to something a lot more fun in Yays and Nays.
Nick Fuentes shows Republicans have their own Mamdani problem.
Yes, and I say this with a lot of disappointment in my heart.
Okay.
Sohran Mamdani is not elected out of nowhere. You need to have at least 15 years of Democrats slowly making concessions in order to, on the one hand, keep its ideologically further left purity tests in place, right? Over time, when you saw in 2020, every single Democratic candidate on the debate stage, except for I think Joe Biden, you have to raise your hand and say, yes, I will have illegal aliens get publicly funded health care for Medicare for all. In order to have those ideological purity tests, you let the far left flank of the party begin to domineer the cultural rules of engagement. And very early on in the Democratic Party, anti-Semitism became a problem in the Obama era, right? To say nothing of Barack Obama, who I think in earnest genuinely thought his idiot JCPOA would work, right? He was earnest about it. I'll give him that credit. I don't think I don't believe the Obama was a crypto anti-Semite. However, in order to get people on his side, he did have to embrace a lot of those people. He did have Bernadine Dohrn and Bill Ayers he was friends with. And he did allow, he did associate with Louis Farrakhan. All of this created a permission structure in the Democratic Party to the point that Joe Biden was pilloried in the final days of his presidency for not being overly gracious to Hamas, right, after October 7th. That is how you wind up with the Democratic Party so rudderless that in the greatest city in the world, America's biggest city and financial capital, you have a socialist win the primary, but this communist win the general with a majority, right? No one thought that Zohran Mamdani was going to break 50%, and he did, while in his final days of the primary, posing with the unindicted co-conspirator of the 93 World Trade Center bombings, right? A bombing attack that was directly caused by anti-Semitism, right? Anti-Jewish hatred along with anti-American sentiment. Those were the two major motivating factors of that bombing. Mamdani bragging about how many people at my rally have been called a terrorist. Mamdani, who, and make no mistake, anti-Semitism, it is a kindred spirit, close cousin, and ideological offshoot of anti-Americanism, of a victim mentality that says everything is your fault, or that everything is the world's fault, not my fault. There has to be someone that's rigging the economy against me. And this is where you get to Nick Fuentes.
Okay.
Nick Fuentes and Zohran Mamdani on paper, they're the same person. The only difference being that Zohran Mamdani has an actual lady wife, whereas Nick Fuentes is an incel. So on top of saying, it's the globalists that are why my rent is too high, why I don't make enough money. On top of that, the Nick Fuentes brand of anti-Semitism also says it's the globalists that are why I don't have a girlfriend. I mean, Nick Fuentes has literally blamed the Jews for that, but I would say if you can't get laid, that's a you problem, sir. So why are we talking about Nick Fuentes, who is this online neo-Nazi that really shouldn't be relevant?
Yeah.
Because, Tucker Carlson hosts a podcast with Nick Fuentes, and it is, an hour and a half of him not pushing back, not asking. You say you're a conservative, and you say you're a big fan of Joseph Stalin, who led to the murder of 100 million people. He did not engage in pro-family policies. He was a militant atheist, and you claim to be this, trad Catholic. There was no pushback. Whatever. Tucker Carlson can do what he wants. We can get into that in a moment. But that was his own thing. Then you have Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the Heritage Foundation, which has been one of the moral, intellectual, real gatekeepers of the Republican Party and the broader conservative movement for 50 years.
Yeah.
The direct product, a twin flame with the success of the Reagan movement, right? Kevin Roberts, who no one knows and no one asked to do this, decides to cut a video defending not just Tucker Carlson, not saying, I might disagree, I might have pushed back way more on the interview, but, we funded Tucker Carlson, he's a personal friend of mine, we don't do advertisement campaigns with his show anymore, I'm just going to leave it at that. Says that we don't go after our friends, including Nick Fuentes in that, saying that those of us who are critical of him for continuing to sponsor Tucker Carlson's podcast, that we were part of the venomous coalition. So we are not in the right. We are not one of Kevin Roberts' good friends, and Nick Fuentes is. So this was about 2 weeks ago. Kevin Roberts has been digging himself to China in a hole, trying to do some PR. Heritage Foundation has lost a number of top scholars, including the economist Steve Moore, who obviously I'm friends with and has been a huge mentor of mine. You have a lot of the Jewish coalitions that have worked with Heritage specifically on the issue of combating anti-Semitism depart ranks. It's crazy inside the building. Based on my knowledge, I do not think Kevin Roberts is long for this world being the Washington, D.C. elite. I think he is, because there were lots of other pre-existing issues. However, if there is a failure to actually clean house at Heritage, I think the Mamdani problem is evident, because you can draw a straight line from the permission structure that gives Kevin Roberts a pass for saying that Nick Fuentes is one of his friends in the conservative movement, and me and my friends are not, and how you get an anti-Semite communist as mayor of New York City.
I'm glad you went first on this, because I'm going to be totally honest. I haven't been paying super close attention to this debate, mostly because I just don't care. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to say yes and no. It is a problem. It's not a problem. Or excuse me, as the question is written, Nick Fuentes shows Republicans have their own Mamdani problem. Yes and no. Nick Fuentes is certainly a problem. We'll get to him in a second. I reject everything you just said about the direct line drawn on the permission structure between Mamdani and Fuentes, and here's why. Zohran Mamdani, for all of his faults, is an elected politician. It's not only the mayor-elect of New York City, he's been a state assemblyman for the last 5 years. He's been out.
Unlike Nick Fuentes, he has had an actual job.
He's had
for
a
the
real
last
job.
3 years.
Yeah, whether you agree with his policies or his voting track record, he is showing up and trying to either, at the very least, govern, and in the most optimistic frame, do good for the people of New York. Whatever. I would say all of the claims about Mamdani being an anti-Semite, which again I reject, just because you are pro-Palestine does not mean you are an anti-Semite or anti-Israel, even though it does kind of seem like Mamdani is anti-Israel to an extent. That's a problem of association, right? Because he's been with Louis Farrakhan.
Okay, not just association. I just one aside I'm going to make because I want you to have your full time to answer this. Why does Mamdani say he does not support a Jewish state, period, because he doesn't believe in states that are based in religion, but he's fine with Pakistani nationalism, which is literally a state that was created in the name of religion to disassociate from the rest of India? Why does he have no problem with every other Islamic state in the world?
Well, I'm going to put on my press secretary hat for a second and say that I can't pretend to get into Zoran Mamdani's mind and explain why he thinks the way he does. No, but I think that's sort of a little bit of a bungled answer on an incredibly nuanced question to which there isn't really a good response to where you can please both sides, right? And I think it's about as good of an option as he could have come up with in a let's get past this question as soon as I can and move on to the next part of the debate. I think that's more or less where he's coming from. Again, not a great answer. I'm not trying to defend Zoran. I'm just simply delineating that I think Nick Fuentes is a much more damaging cancer on society than Zoran Mamdani is. And again, politics aside, or policy aside, maybe he goes full communist and New York goes down the gutter. The voters are probably going to respond to that, correct? But what Mamdani is not doing, even if he is, taking photos with, terrorists, and
yes,
Louis
taking
Farrakhan,
photos with terrorists.
He's not hosting a daily podcast broadcasted out to millions of people and talking about, like you eloquently put, the Jews are the reason I don't have a girlfriend, or the Jews are the reason you got fired from your job. That's just not what he's doing. So I reject outright the premise that this is an apples to apples conversation.
He has blamed the Jews for police violence. He said every New York City police boot on the neck, or every single police boot on the neck of a New York City resident is laced by the IDF, which is psychotic.
No,
which is so it is so, that is textbook, 1910s genre of anti-Semitism. That's not even, post-liberal jihadist anti-Semitism. That's Dreyfus Affair style anti-Semitism.
Not disagreeing with you, but counterpoint, it is kind of par for the course, at least among progressives in the Democratic Party.
And that's the problem.
Sure.
This is my exact point. Appeasing anti-Semites for, just pragmatic opportunism is the same thing as being anti-Semitic. I don't think Kevin Roberts sees a Jew and personally thinks, oh, that's why that's why I had to pay a 6% mortgage instead of 2.5%. I don't think he has that hate in his heart. But being fine with allying with an anti-Semite is just as bad.
Well, I'll cede the point because we love each other, and there is more that I want to get to on this topic, and I think you want to talk about it as well. Because let's dig in on Fuentes. This has been a big topic of conversation on conservative Twitter and in conservative discourse over the last 2 weeks. But we've kind of heard a couple of, big, pun intended, elephants in the room not weigh in. The first and foremost in my mind is Donald Trump, but he's had a lot on his plate the last couple of weeks. And number two is Vice President J.D. Vance.
Which is the much more noticeable one.
I agree. And my read on this situation is Vance, someone who's clearly, at least in my mind, trying to position himself for a 2028 run where he might be going up against the likes of Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio, I don't know, maybe others in the Republican Party that we don't know about. And that's only in the primary, let alone having to go against, nominees AOC or Gavin Newsom or Josh Shapiro or Oprah or whoever. Who knows? And I think he's trying to keep his powder dry to maintain this type of coalition because he doesn't know exactly what type of candidate he's going to be. Is he going to be MAGA 3.0, just a full redux of Donald Trump? Or are we going to see him lean into some of the, I guess, less popular, at least in Trump 2.0, lanes of policy, which I think are really sort of his specialty, and is why he, came on the radar of people like Tucker Carlson, who, let's not forget, basically convinced Donald Trump to make J.D. Vance's VP in the first place after all, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think? Am I onto something here? Is Vance just playing politics, or is it simply, as easy of an explanation as this doesn't rise to the purview of the White House?
So I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
J.D. Vance is, he is also a terminally online millennial in a way that, even Trump is not, right? Trump is a poster, and, he likes seeing, oh, is the base giving me, thumbs up memes and, doing MAGA hats? But he's not following, internecine right-wing debates between, I don't know, Orrin Cass and AEI. Vance is.
Yeah.
Vance is very online. He's a very online millennial, just like you and me. So, and I think as vice president, he's understood. He's been trying to step back a little bit because the job of the vice president is not to be the poster in chief. And frankly, when you are a vassal of a principal, it's better to say less than more because you want to represent the president's policy. All that makes a little bit of sense. But then there is what Vance did post, which was a bit disappointing. In the aftermath of, again, no, I'm not going to lie and be like, oh, the off-year elections, there was okay notes for Republicans. No, it was all bad. Republicans did terribly. Vance recognized that, pointing out the economy really matters, as we'll get into. But he did hint at, we can't have infighting. Which is better than saying what Kevin Roberts has done, which is effectively, there are no enemies to my right, only enemies to my left. And so with J.D. Vance, I understand there has to be a little bit of distance from stupid online drama. There does not have to be distance between what he says and the Heritage Foundation, because the Heritage Foundation has always had a close relationship with the Republican White House. Now it's time for us to fill in the blank.
The biggest takeaway from the 2025 election is blank.
It's still the economy, stupid.
Yeah, I mean, affordability is the easy one, and, I think you've probably heard enough about of that issue from us this week, but I think we can drill down a little bit more. I'm going to take a political tract, and sorry, super producer, this is not one word. It's a lengthy string of clauses, but I think the biggest lesson or the biggest takeaway from last week's election is that essentially Hispanic voters, Black voters, young voters, these major demographics where we saw Donald Trump pick up bigly in 2024, and then those gains evaporate in the 2025 elections, those demographics not only are not monolithic, but two, they cannot be taken for granted. And that includes Democrats coming off of these major victories in the election. And again, I'll throw my hat on the table and say that the government shutdown was a win for Democrats.
Certainly in Virginia.
Sure, yeah.
Undeniable that was a factor in the Virginia election. It was something like 22% of all voters in exit polls in Virginia said that they worked for the federal government.
100%. And let's do a little bit of history. Why did Donald Trump overperform with those groups, not only compared to his previous results, but virtually against every Republican result in a general election ever? One, the economy was really bad, and Joe Biden refused to admit it, right? We can all agree on that. Number two, they poured so much money into targeting these groups in person, on digital media, in television, in Black radio stations, in Hispanic radio stations. It was like nothing we had ever seen before. And, the Democrats at the time were sort of laughing and saying, oh, Donald Trump doesn't know what he's doing. He's just throwing money at anything, hoping it will resolve all the problems. While in reality, we know that Joe Biden is transforming the economy in a way that we've never seen before. Well, I've got news for you. That obviously was not true. Now, parlay that into the midterm elections for 2026, and even again, going into the general in 2028, Donald Trump can go on Truth Social or have a press conference at the White House or fly to Miami and host a business forum and speak to CEOs for an hour and 17 minutes and talk about how amazing Wall Street is doing and how much money, from foreign investments my tariffs are bringing in. But if we are in a K-shaped economy, when I say a K-shaped economy, I mean Wall Street does super well, and you and me, at minimum, don't improve our standing at all, or we see our fiscal security get worse, that message is going to be impossible to cut through, especially in those minority demographics who might not be as affluent as, say, white voters in non-swing states over the age of 50, right? Again, there's a lesson in there for Democrats too. You have to build up your farm system, to use a baseball metaphor. You have to tailor campaigns specifically for the electorates that you're trying to reach, and obviously in a state election that's different than a national election.
There has been a collective amnesia about why Trump won the election. The border was a huge number 2, but the overwhelming number 1 was the economy stupid.
Yeah.
It is all inflation. It is all inflation. And in 2019, Trump presided over the best economy in generations, both by the polls and objectively. And the reason why is because he didn't really have to focus on the inflation part of the quotient. He only had to focus on the growth part, right? Obama presided over relatively low inflation. He just presided over very low growth. So Trump, through the deregulatory regime and through TCJA and all of that, he was able to get the growth off the charts while the inflation stayed fine.
Until COVID. Yeah.
Even
that was really under Biden.
But even during COVID, inflation was not out of control until Biden lit the fuse with the ARP. I still wouldn't have done as much spending as Trump did in 2020, but the point is, until that point, it was still okay.
It was at least in line with, or below the global trends.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I don't think inflation topped 2% at the end, I don't think it topped, and definitely didn't top 2.5 in 2020 at all.
I don't believe.
But
you're right,
I think it stayed under 2 for all of 2020. Joe Biden not only cratered growth, but then also caused massive inflation. So that is the real K-shaped economy, right? Growth going down, prices going up. Trump has brought the growth up massively, right? Q3 GDP should come in again at like over 3%, something like that. That's what it's on pace for. But 3% is great, right? If you can keep over 3% year on year, which Trump has done through largely the deregulatory regime, TCJA has brought back a lot of, capital expenditures, expensing. That has been great. So it is the economy stupid, and you know me, I am a big foreign policy voter, so I am willing to give Trump all the points in the world for preventing a World War III with Iran. He is the one that prevented World War III. He did not start World War III. He prevented it with Iran by preventing a nuclear-powered Iran. He has brought the Gaza war to a peace. He's working on Ukraine, all these wonderful things, and things that have to be done. And also making sure that people's work bring in wages with purchasing power that is increasing, not decreasing. That is the most important thing in the country. It might be the most important thing in the world, because if he doesn't do it, you will wind up with President AOC in 2028, and that should scare us all.
Nothing but respect for my president, perhaps, down the line, Madam President, I don't know. Anyway, that's all the time we've got for this week. Don't forget to let us know in the comments who you think took home victory in this week's clash, and you can go check out more of our reporting at washingtonexaminer.com. In the meantime, go subscribe to this channel, share the video with your friends, and even throw us a like if you're feeling frisky. Until next week, I'm Christian Daytalk.
And I'm Tiana Lowe Desher.